Ladies and gentlemen, welcome on the Data Expert YouTube channel. The most simple way to store information is to save them into files, text or for example Excel. Nevertheless, the moment we get more and more information, storing them in the file stops being sufficient, and here databases comes to the play. There is a tremendous number of the databases. MySQL, Postgre, Oracle, Elasticsearch, MongoDB, BigQuery, and probably hundreds if not few thousand more. It's impossible to become data engineer or data scientist without a database knowledge and experience. You probably can still be a programmer, but even in case of programmers, many of them must know at least database basics. And like always, the most difficult thing is to start. Today we are going to see very simple database SQLite. We are going to connect to it with Python and write some simple SQL queries. Nothing sophisticated, but I think that those are great first steps to learn database. Let's get started. So at the beginning, what is the SQLite? This is very simple database which comes in one file. If you have already a Python installed on your machine, SQLite is already installed with it, so you don't need to take any extra actions. Nevertheless, what is worth installing is a very simple program which is called DB Browser for SQLite. This is a small simple program which helps us to look into our databases, display the content of the tables, write some SQL queries. Basically, small handy tool to have on your PC. The installation is super simple. All the links will be below the movie. It's enough to just go download, select your system, and the installation is very straightforward. Now let's go and write some simple Python programs to create a database and to connect to it. What we need to do, we need to import SQLite free library, which is most likely already installed on your PC. Then we connect to the database. At the beginning, this database does not exist. We don't have such file like a simple DB. Then the next step is to create something what is called cursor. Cursor allows us to execute different SQL queries in our database. So here we create our cursor, and here we use the function which we'll be using frequently, which is called execute. As the parameter of that function, we type SQL query. This is the very simple one, which do nothing else, just create one table called scores with the following columns: ID, name, surname, and the score. So it can be some results of some exam. Then we commit the changes to our databases, which we created at the beginning, and we close our database. Okay, let's execute that program. And once again, let's see into our folder. Let's take a look. The database has been created. Now, the simple way to check what is inside of this database is to use exactly the DB Browser for SQLite. Double click, and we see that there is one table called scores. We can expand it, and we see the list of the columns inside. If we go to the tab Browser the data, that's the simplest way to see what data are in this table. And right now there is no data. It's an empty table. Okay, so that program was successful. Now, let's write something to our table. That's again a very simple program. The schema of it is the same. We import the library, we connect to our database, create the cursor, and again use the execute function to pass the SQL query. In this case, insert into scores. So this is the SQL query which inputs some data. Those are the name of the columns, and here comes the value. ID 1, the name Jack, surname Black, and the score 76. Commit and close. So very similar program to our first one. You don't need to copy that from the video. The link to the codes will be under the video. We execute the program, and let's see the content of our databases. If everything goes smoothly, we should have one row in our database, in our table, scores. Let's check it and browser the data, and we see that we were successful in inserting one row into the database. So now let's generate some sample data a little bit more so we can later on query that. Here we have very similar program, just in this case we have a list with the names, the list with the surname, and 20 times randomly selecting the names, randomly selecting the last name, as well as the score, and adding that to the table. We execute the program, that the rest is very much the same. we commit and close. We execute the program, and again, let's look into the content of our table. Double click, browser data, and we see that, browser data, and we see that this time we have 21 rows, so 1 row added at the beginning and 20 rows added later on. Okay, we were successful with that. And the last thing which we will see from the Python program here, because then we will go to the Jupyter notebook, we will see how we can easily query such table, meaning how we can easily display the content of our table, select star from scores, or we can easily count the number of the rows. We pass over the SQL query to the function execute, and later on, using the function fetch all, we collect the data which are the results of our SQL query and we print it. The same one is going about counting the rows. We pass the SQL query to the function execute, and then with the function fetch one, because in this case we have only one row, we can use the fetch all, but we can also use fetch one function. We print out the results, which will be the number of the rows in this table. We execute the query, and here we see this is what is in our table scores, and we have 21 rows. So that was actually very, very simple, and everyone can do it by him own. Okay, another cool thing to check is how we can connect, how easily we can connect to our SQLite with the use of the library Pandas. In our case, the Pandas is already installed on our PC, so there will be nothing spectacular happening here. We just get the information that it's already done, it's already installed, and then we use Pandas and SQLite 3 to connect to our database, and based on the results from the table scores, create the data frame df, which will hopefully have all the rows from that table. So we use the Pandas library, the function read SQL, we pass over the SQL query to our database. Let's do that. And as the results, we have a data frame created, which is having all the rows selected from our database. We can also save the results to the database. Here we are multiplying the results, the scores, okay, and we are creating the new table which is called new score in our database using toSQL new scores. That's the name of the table, and we pass over the name of our database DB. It was created at the beginning here. Okay, very simple. And then we close our database. Let's check our database now. We go here, double click, and we see the new table, new score. If we look inside, then we see that all the results have been doubled. Those were very simple first steps which everyone can take with SQLite, and should be a good first steps to start learning the database. Of course, the whole topic of the databases is more complex, but you need to start somewhere. At the end, I would like to say that there is a plethora of the sample databases available in SQLite, like this one, which already consist a lot of interesting data. Like in this case, we have some album, artists, customers, employees, and so on. This is the sample database. We can browse that database. It's a really good thing to download such databases. I will copy the link to this database below the movie and play a little bit with it. Try to connect to it, display the different information, try to count the rows, or whatever else you would like to do. Basically, it gives you some starting point to learn SQL and to learn how to manipulate the databases with Python. That's it for today. Thank you for your attention and see you soon.